This is a production of Cornell University.
All right, so if we're going to be managing soil organic matter, and there's a lot of different reasons why we would do that. I mean, we want to dispose of organic matter, okay? We might want to build up the humus material of our soils for all these benefits, okay? We might want to increase infiltration and aeration. We might, in fact, want to improve soil climate as well as prevent damage to the soils, okay? But what are the things that we can do to actually increase organic matter? Okay? They're basically two different things. One is reduce the losses, and one is increase the inputs. Okay, if we want to reduce the losses, we can control erosion, prevent the loss of the material. Okay? We can also select plants that are more resistant to decay or deliver their material in such a way that they're more resistant to decay. Okay? If we look at the population of organic matter that's in the soil, where its major source is from, what part of the plant is most, let me say this differently. If we look at the organic matter that is in the soil, and we look at where that organic matter came from, the vast majority of it is actually, it's still there, is actually from the roots, not from the shoots. So if we put in plant material that has lots of roots, potentially we'll be encouraging more soil organic matter. Because the stuff that comes in at the top, because of its location, is easily decomposed. Okay? We also can modify the soil environment. Okay? You can certainly manage if I start preventing oxygen from getting into the system, I certainly will have decreased rates of decomposition. Does that make sense? I mean, if the system goes wet, what happens to decomposition rates? They crash. Okay. Now, we can also increase the inputs. Okay. I can certainly be adding organic material, and a lot of gardeners and farmers around here do that all the time. Now, the farmers are doing it because they need to get rid of manure, but the gardeners and other community gardeners and stuff like that are adding it because they're trying to build up the quality of their soils from a soil health. We can also certainly incorporate our crop residues. Okay, put them in the soils, keep them there. Okay, and we also, and this is a sort of a strange one if you think about it, but I can actually increase OM in my soils by increasing the productivity of the biomass that's on top of my soils. Yes, I'm going to be harvesting more, but if you think about it, I'm also going to be leaving behind more. And if I leave behind more, I'm increasing the inputs. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah, kind of? Go. Well, I can think of the Green Revolution type of example where this is not necessarily, this would be conventional agriculture, where in one situation I have corn that's growing without fertilizer, and one I have where I've got corn growing with fertilizer. And I move from, 10 bushels to 310 bushels. That's a little bit much, but, well, actually 310 is sort of in the range. Okay. Now, I'm going to be taking more corn off the field, but to have 310 bushels of corn, that means I have a lot more biomass of corn stalk and leaves and everything else, stuff that I'm not harvesting. Now, from a farmer's perspective, that actually might become silage and he might feed it to his cows, but even if that's the case, that manure is coming back to the field. Does that make sense? Yeah? You may not like the conventional agricultural approach, but yeah, and then you can start thinking about nitrogen fixation. If I start putting in alders or something like that. Is alder the nitrogen fixing tree? Yeah. Yeah? Okay. If I start it's one of many. I'm a temperate person. So, if I put in a tree that's going to has more biomass, but also brings nitrogen into the soil that encourages other plants to grow, you're going to see an increase in biomass production, which then means even if certainly if I'm not harvesting, but even if I am harvesting, I'm going to see an increase. That's an increased crop yield. I may be grasses and trees, but it's still a crop. Does that make sense to everybody? Questions on this one? Go.
So if we're adding, like, say, nitrogen fertilizer to the soil, would that not speed up the rate of decay and thus?
Yeah, that's a good point. If we're adding nitrogen to the soil, potentially as a fertilizer, we might in fact actually be increasing the rates of decay. But again, it's that delta between decay and accumulation. Yes, I might be increasing decay, but if I'm increasing production at a higher rate than I'm increasing decay, and we can take that, we could basically spin that and turn it the totally other way. Why do we have so much carbon in environments that have really poor primary production? Think of all the cold climates of the world. Okay? Yeah, just as long as I have more carbon accumulation growth than I have decay, and that cold environment is stalling decay, yes, it's stalling primary production, but it's stalling decay more than it's stalling primary production. And just as long as I have that delta, I'm going to have accumulation. And that's where I get that's why I get these large stocks of carbon farther north.
And so there is a delta.
There is a delta. I start adding nitrogen. It's not, this is not like I'm going to increase production and decay at the same rate. You never will get that. And sometimes the increase, if I over nitrogen, if I put too much nitrogen, I could certainly have a scenario where I increase decomposition much more than I increase primary production. Okay, does this make sense to everybody? We're comfortable with this conversation at this point? Yeah? Cool? All right. So let's actually talk about some factors that you can actually use. So promoting factors that promote gain versus factors that promote losses. It's a long list, and I don't really want to read through all of these, but you're really looking at sort of any type of process that will increase the primary production. Okay? Yeah, I guess you could also throw in here things that would decrease decomposition, but really most of the management strategies that we think of are strategies that increase production, increase organic matter accumulation. Okay? Now, the factors that promote loss are basically things that are increasing harvesting, increasing the loss of that material off the soil, erosion, overgrazing, fire, excessive mineral nitrogen, putting too much fertilizer on, okay? Low plant productivity as a result, anything that's really going to increase that loss from the system. Okay, does that make sense? Question?
So you had given the example of the urban situation and how
right.
that actually increases organic material.
Yeah, the example that I gave was, so the question is, I was using an example of the urban scenario where we had an increase. Okay.
In an urban situation where people are raking and removing the organic material, how is that being calculated, that there's an increase in organic material?
So how is this number being calculated? So in an urban scenario where people are raking their leaves and things like that and then bagging them and taking them someplace else, why are we seeing these increases in here? You have to think about the entire system. Okay, so some of these scenarios could be actually the landfills. Some of these scenarios could be abandoned sites. Some of these materials could be demoed material that's been basically buried. Urban environments have huge repositories of material that's just basically thrown in underneath them. Okay, and then on top of that, you start actually thinking about the buildings themselves. Now, this doesn't represent what's in the buildings. This number is not, that would be like calculating soil organic matter by looking at trees, above ground tree stock. We don't do that. We basically look at what's below ground. Okay? But the pools that are in here represent, yes, I do pull off a lot of that organic matter, but where does that organic matter go? We may be moving it, and this location right here may in fact have a loss of organic matter, but this location over here may have a gain. And so we're looking at the entire urban ecosystem, not just specific biomes or ecotypes in that urban environment. Okay, now, one other thing to throw in there. If you think about urban environments, you're thinking about it in a temporal sense as of right now. This represents, so you might be in fact right here on this scale versus right here when it's been converted from an agricultural system into an urban system. Okay? When that subdivision went up on the agricultural field, this is what it looked like. A couple years, it looks like this, and this is where people are starting to rake. So you might actually be flatlining it here, but depends on where on this line you're looking for that.
From like an industrial city perspective, where I have a really
Okay, so an industrial city, let's take New York City. Okay, Staten Island. Let's use Staten Island as an example. Staten Island used to be the breadbasket for New York City until the construction of the Erie Canal. Okay, which then totally displaced where wheat and grain were coming. Okay, but even then, Staten Island was still the fruit center for New York City. Staten Island, Brooklyn, Queens. Okay, and that all went to agriculture. There's still farms in New York City in the traditional sense, not the urban agriculture that's sitting on top of roofs. There's still farms in New York City where they're plowing ground. Okay, now imagine that landscape, and then I take that landscape and turn it into a building. And I put landscaping around it. And I start growing grass. And yes, I cut the grass and I harvest the leaves, but I'm still accumulating from that organic percentage that was in the agricultural system. I'm certainly not bringing it back to here. I'm definitely not bringing it back to there. But compared to here, I'm seeing an accumulation. Does that make sense? Okay, we good to go there, guys? Let's go to this one right here. So we're talking about, how much time do I have left? I got 20 minutes? Okay, good. Okay, so talking about management. Okay, the reality is of management, when you start talking about it, it's not just the management that you can do, active management, but you also think about the climate itself. In general, when you start thinking about decomposition, increasing precipitation and increasing temperature is going to increase soil matter decomposition. SOM decomp. Okay?
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.